Well, good morning. How are we all doing this morning? Wonderful. Good. Well, hey, I just want to start the service by opening up with a word of prayer, if that's all right to you. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for this church. Thank you for this body of believers, Lord. I thank you for the worship that we sang this morning. Thank you that so many people are willing to serve. Lord, I ask this morning as we press through, make my words few, that you speak through your servant. Lord, give all of us ears to hear, minds to understand, eyes to see, and hearts to receive. Make me less, so you become more. All these things I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of going to the Holy of Holies. If you don't know where the Holy of Holies is in America, it's about 3.5 hours northeast of here, up I-44, along the river. There's an arch there, and next to that is 60,000 red-seated stadium with a beautiful green diamond in the middle of it, and it's called Busch Stadium. And it's one of those places where you kind of have to take a knee and bless yourself before you go in. And it was the last home game of the regular season, and we got tickets to go. And so I went, my wife went, we took our 6-year-old son. My dad went along with us, and we got to take, for the first time since 1997, my brother got to join us. And he took his youngest son, Ashton, and that was his first St. Louis Cardinals game. Well, what a game to remember. Because before the game, they did a retirement ceremony for Yadier Molina and Albert Pujols. And they set up a little area for chairs and gifts given around home plate. And Yadi, before they came out, they started with showing this video on the Jumbotron, and it's all the memories of Yadi and Pujols together over 20 years. And I just cried. And my wife is kind of poking me, teasing me, and I was like, I don't care. I really didn't. And then they walked out of the dugout, and all the fans started cheering, and they said their goodbyes. It was truly a moment for us and them to say goodbye. And you kind of couldn't help but get the sense as they're giving their farewells. You look down at the Cardinal dugout and you see all these young ball players, younger than me now. That's weird to think about. And they're all leaning on the fence and sitting on the stone stairway coming out of the dugout. And you just kind of looked up at Yadi and Pujols and you thought, goodbye to the old. And you looked down at that dugout and you said, good luck to the new. And as Albert Pujols said goodbye that day, he gave us one more swing of magic. And I was smart enough to get my phone out and video it. So I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to let you watch for yourself. Mike, let's roll that beautiful day. 7:02. 7:02. As he rounded the bases, emotions just flooded. I remember his first one. I remember going there in 2006, 2011. But looking out of the corner of my eye, seeing my dad with my brother, I remember going back to 91, 93, the bad years, and just reminiscing after all those years, and it just welled up, and I could not help but cry. And as he crossed home plate, went to the dugout, a couple innings later, they pulled Waino and Yadier Molina, Adam Wainwright, and Albert Pujols walked off the field together, and I was standing in a different portion of the stadium, and I just, goodbye. I want to pause from you for a second. I just want to look at our camera. Albert, if this somehow ever sermon makes your phone, you and Yachty both, if you ever somehow get it sent to you and it's on your phone or on your TV, I just want to say goodbye. And on behalf of myself and many other Cardinal fans and families, thank you for the memories. And even though you're gone, we won't forget you. And to all those other Cardinal players out there, good luck as you begin your careers. We have a very similar situation this morning. It's found in 2 Kings chapter 2. It's one of those stories where it really kind of hammers into the human heart. Andrew did a wonderful job last week of leading us through 1 Kings chapter 18, and we get a very dramatic scene of Elijah calling fire down from heaven. And the text says that he summoned all of Israel. So the assumption would be that being a part of all of Israel, Elisha would be there as well. And so he calls fire down from heaven, and we kind of put two and two together when we start piecing some of the narratives together. And the next thing you know, God shows up to Elijah and says, go find Elisha and anoint him as your replacement. And so some things kind of take place in Israel. There's some battle scenes. There's a new king comes on the block, and there's still this guy raising some Cain in Jerusalem, in Israel. And the new king doesn't like him. And he sends out some soldiers, and he says, if I'm a man of God, fire from heaven again, and whoosh, just consumes the 50. And the word gets back to the king, and the king's kind of dumb enough to go send another 50. And he sends another 50. Whoosh, if I'm a man of God, fire from heaven. The third guy had a clue. And he shows up, hits his knees, and goes, please spare my life. Will you just go see the king? And Elijah finally goes, all right, I'll go talk to the guy. The messenger comes back and he says, it's this guy out there. And he says, what's he look like? And he's got like a hairy coat and a big brown leather belt. And you can almost see the king go, it's Elijah the Tishbite. Palm to forehead moment. And then he says, Elijah grabs Elisha. They're going on to their ministry. They're working forward. And then the text starts to take a dramatic shift. And where we're going to see the shift this morning, I find it kind of interesting. We're doing a sermon series on mountains, but we're not on a mountaintop this week. This week, we're in the valley. I told Andrew, I find it kind of peculiar that we're literally right smack dab in the middle of the sermon series. And my assigned text is to preach on a valley. They start to make their way. They go through a city named Bethel, and they go through a city named Jericho. And some interesting conversation takes place back and forth between Elijah and Elisha. And Elijah, as he's leading Elisha, doing all of these, calling fire from heaven and all the different things that Elijah does, you see Elijah, you can almost just see him in the background, watching and observing, studying, listening. I want to be like this guy. I'm going to follow him. And in 2 Kings chapter 1, They start going through Bethel and Jericho, and it's really kind of interesting. These educated Bible college students kind of show up and look at Elisha and say, you know you're going to lose your master today? You know he's going to die? And he says, yes. Don't speak of it. They keep going, happens again. You know you're going to lose your master today? Yes. Don't speak of it. Finally, you can almost, as they come down to the Jordan, and Elisha has asked Elijah a couple times, I'm going to go with you. And Elijah says, I'm going to go where you can't go. I'm going to go from you pretty soon. My educated guess would be they both knew something was about to happen, but they didn't know what. I'm going where you can't go. I'm going to go with you. And he follows them, gets the comments, he's going. I know he's going to go, but I'm going to go with him. I'm going to stay with him. The assumption that I am getting from this is that Elisha couldn't let go. Finally, we get 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 7. And it says, 50 men of the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing a place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water. The water divided right and left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me what I can do for you before I am taken from you. Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit, Elisha replied. You have asked a difficult thing, Elijah said, yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise not. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven on a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them apart. He picked up the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak that had fallen from him and struck the water with it. Where is Yahweh, the God of Elijah? I find this story rather personal, and we're going to walk through some of that today. But I want to make a couple of observations in the text before we get there, if you would allow me. But before we start making those observations, I would just like a moment to pause and say to Elijah, goodbye to the old. And to Elisha, as you begin your ministry, good luck. It says they go down to the Jordan River, and Elijah parts the water with his cloak. And as they cross over on dry ground, it just kind of seems like a good old boy story. It's almost as if Elijah was giving his farewell request on his deathbed. Is there anything I can do before I go? Tell me what I can do for you. And Elisha makes a very interesting request. He says, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. We understand that in the Old Testament, that's a legal term, and it's a legal term for I want to be your successor. Let me give you another observation. I'm guessing that Elisha didn't know that because Elijah never told him. Because in 1 Kings chapter 19, it says, go anoint Elisha to be your replacement. So he was instructed, I got to anoint you to be my replacement, but yet he's asking here, can I be your replacement? Can I be your successor? It's kind of, you can hear the thoughts going through Elijah's head going, well, that's up for the Lord to decide. But I'll tell you what, if you see me go, the double portion is yours for the taking. And all of a sudden, a whirlwind comes down. And I've always wondered about the chariots of fire. And over the years, I think I've come to the conclusion of why God sent chariots of fire. Because Elisha just couldn't let go when he knew it was coming. Because it says that the chariots came down and separated them. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to try to make my way through and past a chariot of fire. If it comes in between me and whatever, it's like, you win. And he watches him go out on a whirlwind. And as the whirlwind takes Elijah, the cloak falls. And he goes over and he takes this cloak, this one fragmented piece of memory that I have of my mentor. I'm taking his cloak. And he strikes the water the same way his mentor did. And the water parts. But he asked a very peculiar question that I'm sure many of you have asked. Where is God? I've asked that a lot. I've lost a lot. 2 years ago, I tallied up the number of people that I've lost, funerals I've been to, friends, church family, friends. I've been to more funerals than years I've been alive, and I'm 38. Loss hurts. And here's what I can try to tell you. I've asked many of you this question. I remember some of my conversations with you. I don't know what's harder. Getting a phone call that someone's died in a tragic auto accident and it's the surprise. Or having to watch someone for 6 months, a year. You know the door's there. And you get to a point where you kind of think, I just wish this would be over. I don't know which one's harder. My honest assessment is neither one's easier than the other. Grief is grief, and it's hard losing people that you love, that you follow in their footsteps, that you pour into, that you do ministry with, and you lose them. It's hard. And I know it personally. Because I too have lost an Elijah. His name was Rick Roundtree. I met him when I was 17. And we sang at church together. We were in a quartet. I sang bass, go figure. And we sang for years, and he kept his... That's why I keep my front porch open all the time. I spent a lot of nights on his front porch talking about God, talking about ministry.
my parents were split, and I came to find out that his parents, he comes from a split home, divorced, and they divorced about the same time that my parents did. And so he walked me through a lot of things. And he, as much as we would be frustrated about the ministry, he never let me lose sight of the master. He would always gear our conversations back to Jesus. And I wanted to be like him. One night we found ourselves in Carthage, Missouri, at a Civil War arena at a rodeo Bible camp. Or not a rodeo Bible camp, but a cowboy church. We went to rodeo Bible camps, but we were at the church. Anyway. And we sang the songs. We sang At the Cross, and then we sang There is a River. And as we're leaving the grounds that night, I said, hey, I got a song I need you to listen to. I think we should try to sing it. And he's like, all right. So I opened up my brand new CD case. Now, for you kids in the room, a CD is a little circle, and it's got a hole in the middle, and you used to be able to spin them on your finger and then right into this thing called the CD player in your dashboard. And I put it in there, and he goes, what's the name of the song? And I said, Jesus and John Wayne. It says, somewhere between a sinner and a saint, the cross and the open range. I try to be more like you, Lord, but most days I know I ain't. I'm somewhere between Jesus and John Wayne. I looked at him and I said, this is my jam. And he said, let's do it. And I hugged him. I said, I love you. That was the last time I ever saw him. 2 days later, May 10th, 2008, I got a call at 3:28 in the morning from Virgil, the other guy in our quartet. And he said, sit up, I do not want to repeat myself. So I sat up and I said, okay. He said, Rick and Kathy and Clay and Ruby are all dead. And I said, how? He said, they were driving down from Joplin to Racine, and they were going down 43 highway. And when they got to the intersection of 43 and Iris Road, the tornado came through and took he and his whole family, minus his daughter. His daughter survived. She was in Joplin, Cali. And I said, okay. Well, I was asking, where are you? I don't remember much of that week, to be honest with you. It was a blur, but I only remember one thing. Every single day, I ask God, will you please give me one more conversation with Rick? Will you please? I still feel the pain of what those days were like. But I heard Billy Graham talking about crossing over to the other side and people coming back. I remember watching Johnny Cash on Larry King. 13-year-old kid watching Larry King. I don't know why. But Johnny was on it, and he said that he crossed over to the other side and came back. And Larry King said, well, what was it like? He said, I can't describe it. It's the most beautiful place I ever saw. He said, I came up off the table and I was telling the doctors, let me go back. Let me go back. So I believed that something could happen. And the day of the funeral, I woke up and I saw my funeral clothes hanging on the door. And I just prayed to God one last time. will you please give me one more conversation with Rick? Just one. And I remember putting my arms back and laying on my bed, and I was in heaven. And I don't know how to explain it. I know it sounds weird. I don't know if it was a vision, if it was a dream. I don't know if I was like an out-of-body experience. I definitely know it wasn't an acid trip because I don't take acid. But I crossed. I'm telling you, I have seen it. And I'm telling you, it's real. It's there. I've seen the Rockies. I've seen the Tetons. Nothing compares to those mountains. I'm telling you. And I've always heard of the golden sky, but I saw it. You know, and as I was trying to take it all in, because it's something, I just looked to my left, and there was Rick. And Jesus was standing next to him. I know that I didn't see Jesus' face, but it was like, I just knew, like, that's him. And Rick walked right up to me, and he said three things, and I'm going to pass them on to you. He said, finish strong, for great will be your reward. And he grabbed my head the only way that Rick can do that, and he pulled me in tight, and he said, trust me. Then I woke up. I was in my room. We had to get to the funeral. Valley. All of that, and I still had a valley to battle. I still had a valley to go through because it wasn't over. And we get to the funeral, and Willis couldn't even sing. But I had to do probably single-handedly the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. I was a pallbearer. And I remember walking up and grabbing Rick's casket and taking him out the center aisle, putting him in the hearse. But then I had to go back in. And I had to carry Clayton's casket. It was so little. He was just 10. I'm not that arrogant guy that says, well, I'm going to have my words with God when I get there, but I am going to ask him something. I'm like, why the kids? He was my little buddy. A little tiny, it's like the sidebar on that casket is just seared in my hand and in my memory, and it keeps you up. It'll wake you up at 3. It'll wake you up at 3 just to find yourself wandering across the house just to open your kid's door. See him mouth breathing, thanking God that you still have him. You can't get them out of your mind. You can't. The memories are there, and it's hard, and they wash up. I'm at the graveyard, and all of a sudden, Virgil comes power walking up. A lot like my wife walks in the mall. Bye, babe. And he says, you got to hear this. And I'm trying to console some friends over by a tree line. He says, you got to hear this. I said, what? And he goes, come here. I'm thinking, great, now I have to walk. So he takes me to the front of the graveyard, and there's like the old school graveyard where it's got like the chapel and the facilities thing. And there's a guy there. I'm not trying to be derogatory, but my first word came to mind, just kind of a beatnik, big old overalls, long beard, hair, groundskeeper. And Virgil goes, you tell him what you told me. I'm like, well, let's hear it. And he said, yeah, I saw that whole tornado. Saw it way over there, and there's a tree line. He goes, it went all the way across the sky, right across there. I'm thinking to myself, I'm not in a great headspace. I was thinking to myself, well, congratulations. You want a cupcake for that? I'm putting my best friend in the dirt. And he says, yeah, then the weirdest thing happened. When that tornado got right there, it lit up like a light bulb. Still, I'm like, okay. And then he said this. You know how shafts of light come down out of clouds and you can see them? Yeah, and he goes, they shot out of that tornado. The whole tornado lit up, and there was just rays of light everywhere. I've seen tornadoes hit power lines and generators before. It's a quick flash. This lasted 5-6 seconds. That whole thing lit up right there. Virgil looks at me and he goes, do you know where right there is? I said, no. And he goes, that's right over 43 and Iris Road. And I thought right then, God took Rick out on a whirlwind. And maybe, just maybe, he filled that sucker with some chariots of fire. One last story. I heard this story a while back, and I thought it was too good not to share with you. There's a painting. Mike, go ahead and throw that painting up on the screen if you can. This painting is over in the Louvre. And the title of the painting is called Checkmate. And if you look on the left side in the green, that's the devil. The other side in the red, that's a man, and he's having a chess match with the devil. And all of a sudden, you see this angel in the background looking a little concerned over mankind. And the devil's got a smirk on his face. And the chess pieces, you can see the devil has more chess pieces taken than the man. Well, this was on display over at the Louvre in, I think the Louvre's in France, woohoo. And the tour comes through, and the tour guide describes the whole painting, tells the whole group about it, and they start to move on. Well, what that tour guide didn't know was that in that group of people was a world champion chess player. And that world champion chess player didn't move on with the rest of the group. He stood there and he kept examining that chessboard. And as the tour guide gets a few paintings down, he realizes that this guy's still lingering in the back. So he says, hey, I got to go get this guy. So he comes back and he says, sir, we've moved on. Can you please come with us? And he goes, well, we got a problem. The tour guide says, well, what's that? And he goes, well, I'm a world champion chess player, and I've been looking at this painting. And he goes, yes, it was painted whenever. Here's the artist's name. Here's what it means. And he goes, I know all that, but we got a problem. And he says, well, what's that? And he says, well, they're either going to have to repaint the painting or they're going to have to rename it. And the tour guide looks at the painting and looks at the guy and says, well, what makes you say that? And he says, well, I'm a world champion chess player, and here's what I've come to tell you. The king still has one more move. The king still has one more move. In 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 14, when Elisha takes the cloak of his mentor, experiencing the loss, experiencing the hurt, experiencing the pain, he takes the cloak of Elijah and he says, where is God? And he strikes the water, and when the water strikes, it parts. It's like God looking down going, I still got one more move, big boy. So keep going forward. When you read to the end of the chapter, here's my last observation about the text. Even though Elisha makes a pit stop along the way, from this valley, the first place he's headed, right back up to Mount Carmel. Right back up to Mount Carmel. Makes pit stop along the way, but he's a man on a mission. And he goes back up to Mount Carmel. And the text doesn't tell us why, but my guess would be this. I'm going to go start where my guy left off, where he demonstrated calling fire from heaven in front of all of Israel, destroying prophets of Baal. That's the double portion I want. That's the double portion. That's the spirit. That's the ministry I want to have. So he goes back up to Mount Carmel, and then it says he takes off into Samaria. And when he goes into Samaria, you can keep reading. It's a dramatic ministry. The interesting things is the things that Elisha does aren't the same things that Elijah does. Two completely different ministries. Goodbye to the old and good luck to the new. And when God crossed me over to heaven and had Rick stand in front of me and say, finish strong, for great will be your reward. God showed it to me. If you want to know what motivates your guy today, it was that. My eyes have seen the glory. I'm telling you, gang, it's there. And I was charged by my mentor that you finish strong. And for great will be your reward. And I trust Rick. I trust Yahweh. I trust Jesus. Yahweh saves. The King, no matter what we see, still has one more move. You may be having a marriage that's on the rocks right now. The King still has one more move. Your finances might not be adding up the way you want them. The King still has one more move. You may have sat here and thought about taking your own life, but you're still here today because you know the King still has one more move. And because the King still has one more move, you finish strong. That's what he's called you to do. You can retire from your jobs all you want. You don't retire from serving Yahweh. And this is where we fight. God says that the devil owns this place. He is the principality of the world. And so this is his playground. But you finish strong. And when you're in the valleys, when the devil thinks and you think the devil's got you had, the King still has one more move. Because you serve a God who that when all of Israel thought it was over, he parted the waters. You serve a God that when they said, we'll worship this one, he calls fire from heaven and destroys all of it. You serve a God that when he said, it is finished, he didn't say, I'm all done. And the stone rolled away because it couldn't hold him back. And then one day, he came down and they preached the greatest sermon ever in Acts chapter 2, and 3,000 people got dunked. The King still has one more move. And one day, he's coming back and he's going to show the final move. But until that day, this is where you stand. This is where you fight. And so you fight on, knowing that the King still has one more move. So finish strong. And great will be your reward. Trust me. Trust me. Dear gracious Heavenly Father,